Welcome to Takeover Footy Wrap. This is Takeover TV, and tonight it's myself, Mark Finey, and Campbell Brown to go through all of the weekend's action and a few of the stories surrounding the AFL as well. How are you, Campbell?
Finey, great to be here, mate. It's been another massive week in AFL football, hasn't it? Good results. There's been some controversial bumps. Some good footy played, but also the hubs, and we're back in lockdown here in Victoria.
Yeah, we're a state set apart from the rest of the world, and you're doing what I'm doing, a little bit of a COVID-19 beard.
Yeah, I always have a bit of stubble, mate. You know that, but might get a little bit longer than usual.
Yeah, I'm going to see how far mine goes as well. We'll just try and maybe turn it into something that a bird can live in. Let's get stuck into a few of the footy stories. Well, let's have a quick chat about the hubs. Obviously, what they were hoping to be 4 weeks away is now 6 weeks away, and I just can't see it anything other than no more football in Victoria for the season.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it'd be absolutely remarkable if football returned back here to Victoria after the numbers of COVID cases we've had this week, and it continues to rise. So it does look like football here will be put on the back burner for at least a little while. We've still got till sort of October, maybe November, but things would have to change pretty rapidly. So fantastic the games can still be played in Sydney, Queensland. They'll be heading over to Perth shortly, and then even they've got the top end as well up in Darwin. That's a possibility. So, the AFL's done a pretty good job at logistically managing it all and getting all the clubs out of Victoria pretty swiftly, and just another obstacle for players and clubs to overcome.
Where do you think the grand final is going to be held?
I wrote an article during the week, Finey. I don't think that. I've always been the biggest advocate of it always being at the MCG, because I think 100,000, it's the home of football. It's one of the great sporting stadiums in the world when it's packed to capacity. But I think this year there's only going to be two logical explanations where it can be played. Optus Stadium over in Perth or the Gabba. I mean, ANZ Stadium, I've played there. The surface is putrid. Players don't like it. I don't think there was any scheduled games to even be played there this year until COVID hit. So that, to me, is not a viable option. The SCG is just too small as a footy ground. It's just a little bit unusual, the shape of it and how close the centre is to the 50s and everything. So I think Perth and Brisbane are the logical options for me anyway, but there's been plenty of conjecture. What about yourself?
Probably Perth is the logical option, 60,000, and it's a good footy oval. But part of me says, you know what, take Victoria out of the equation. And given that West Coast are probably back in it with a shot now, as they've got a bit of form heading back to Perth, Port Adelaide certainly might be in the mix, GWS in the mix, Brisbane in the mix. Why not play it in the state or even at the home ground of the team that makes it an interstate team, if there's one interstate and one Victorian team? If there's two interstate teams, pick the venue that seats most fans. In other words, give fans of at least one of the teams a chance to fill up the stadium.
I think that Queensland, the government and their premier and everything have been so hospitable to Victoria and teams and the hubs, and been, as far as I'm concerned, one of the real big players in terms of keeping the AFL season alive. Surely that plays into it a little bit. You know what I mean? Like that, they've been playing.
Well, she wrote a letter to Gil McLachlan suggesting that, thanks to us, the season keeps going.
Well, that's right. And the Perth Premier, West Australian Premier, has sort of done the opposite. You can't judge him or blame him, but if I was Gil McLachlan, I'm looking at where the game is going to be played. They've been trying to push football in Queensland forever, bringing in the Suns and doing all that. Well, this would be the year to sort of play it at the Gabba, especially if Brisbane are up and about, and they've been so good and flexible with keeping the season alive. I think that would put them in the box seat if I was Gill.
Yeah, I don't know qualms whatsoever if it was decided that it was in Brisbane. Wouldn't that be something? The first grand final away from Victoria to be held in a non-traditional AFL state. Wouldn't that be something? But that does speak volumes for where football is at the moment.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Who would have thought? But 2020 is a crazy old year, and I feel like you can get away with doing almost anything. There was talk here in Melbourne during the week. Lewis Martin came out and said, wouldn't it be great if the Brownlow medal was in Alice Springs or Ayers Rock, Uluru. And so, who would have thought that would even be discussed? But this year, I think if you can throw up anything, it can work.
But it's such a movable feast. I mean, have we heard overnight? Obviously, the COVID numbers here in Victoria or in Melbourne are serious, alarming, and
yes.
We are a state set aside. But wasn't there reports overnight in Sydney of a supermarket employee or
yeah, and there's been a
COVID-19,
pub as well.
So
there's been a pubs with plenty of them exposed.
Yeah, pub. Sorry, it was a guy, somebody in a pub. So things can, and it spreads quickly. Things can change very rapidly.
No, that's right, Finey. And mate, what did you think of? I thought the best performance of the round so far, and I know there's still one game to be played later on tonight. But what the Cats did on Thursday night, they were completely outplayed for the first half. They were 2 down on the bench with Duncan and Narkle going down. They looked shot. For them to sort of turn it around, dominate the second half and win under a bit of duress with injuries was by far the performance of the round so far. I thought they were sensational, led by their senior guys.
Yeah, I think that was equal to Fremantle, who almost did exactly the same thing. This is, as a St Kilda supporter, this is as painful a loss as I can remember. 7 goals to 1 in the first quarter, in an abbreviated quarter, in a season where any team that's got a lead maintains the lead and wins the game. I mean, St Kilda's done it twice now, once against North, once against Fremantle. What's the saying, Campbell? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Yeah.
And you might want to include St Kilda somewhere in that sentence. Let's go back to that Geelong-Brisbane game, though. And by the way, with Fremantle, also 2 key players off the field. In fact, even though they were trailing by 30 points at the time, the best man on the ground, Sean Darcy, went off. And he was best man while they were, basically just, putting fingers in the dike. So what a loss he was. And Hayden Young he's a very good player. So they lost 2 players early. But we'll go back to Thursday night and Cats lose Narkle, who provides plenty of run, and Mitch Duncan, who really is he is their sort of run, goal-kicking midfielder that when they lock down on the big names or when you tick off on all the big names, he's the one that bites you on the backside. So,
yeah,
it's an excellent victory, and it's one that just catapults them into the discussion again.
Yeah, it does.
And I use the word cat in catapult, so very clever.
Yeah, well done. Good, nice pun there. Mate, there's no doubt about it, because Brisbane were going into the game on Thursday night, probably the best side in the competition, weren't they? They did a number on Port Adelaide. That form is shown to be pretty rock solid. And just the way in-game, it's really hard in modern footy to change trends so rapidly. They went in at half-time. Zorko was dominating. Lachie Neale was dominating. They got smashed in their clearances. And whatever Scotty said, they just did a terrific job because all of a sudden, Dangerfield was outstanding. Selwood's always great in the contested side of the game. But they started to put some clamps on some of the ball movers of Brisbane, and they were unsighted. And blitz halves run and carry out of the back half was outstanding. I thought Menegola, is one of the most underrated players in the competition. He was brilliant. Simpson, young guy, hadn't played AFL footy for 18 months, was brilliant, and they just got their tail up, and Brisbane looked pretty impotent going forward after that. Hardly scored. So, yeah, it was some sort of turnaround. It's hard to do in a half of football.
What do you make of, I mean, it is a different football, isn't it, 16 and a half minutes? What are some of the things that have changed? I think the obvious ones are he only did one ruckman now. He can probably see out the quarter. But also with rotations, it seems as though it's hard for teams to, if they are 3 or 4 goals down heading into the last quarter, it's hard for them to mount a challenge. I guess that tiring factor that hopefully, if you're behind, might come to play for the opposition just doesn't play a part. How's the game changed as far as you're concerned?
I reckon, you used to have to play tempo football for some period of time in a quarter and just take 3, 4, 5 minutes off the clock, play slow just to either wrestle the momentum back or maintain a lead going into a quarter or whatever that was. I just find now that they're 16 and a half, there hasn't been a lot of tempo footy played. There's been a little bit of keepies off in terms of just chipping the ball around, but I don't really necessarily think that's been tempo related. That's just been some style of play for some clubs. But, yeah, it certainly seems to be more free-flowing, lower scoring. The defence is really holding up across the board, and, there haven't been too many high-scoring games of footy. There's been some boring games of footy. I mean, I watched Friday night, Collingwood and Hawthorn. Honestly, I was screaming at the TV for Hawthorn players to play on and to stop going lateral or backwards. Every single time a Hawthorn player got the footy, they were slow, chipped it sideways, chipped it short, and no wonder they couldn't score, because they were just playing into the hands of the Pies. So, that's probably been the main one, Finey. And
yep,
it's been a tough season in terms of to get a really good read on trends and patterns, I reckon. It's only just taken now, about round 6, for me to start to work out, okay, well, they're a really good side and this is how they play and everything, because it's been chopping and changing a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it just a little bit later, but about putting wins back-to-back and really looking like the side to take the competition by the scruff of the neck. Maybe the Doggies have a chance tonight because they'll go 4 in a row. We'll see whether they can take up the cudgels, because I thought, GWS over the last couple of weeks looked the goods, but Port Adelaide put the brakes on that, so they're back in the frame. Just talking about Friday night, Collingwood added a couple of youngsters, one making his debut, another one just in his second or third game, Isaac Kaynor and R2. Here we go. I'm going to have a go at it.
Yeah, have a go.
Yeah, I'm going to have a crack. You see, I've got a nickname for him, but Bosenovalagi.
Not bad, yeah. Yeah,
it's a try.
Bosenovalagi. Yeah, I reckon that's pretty good, Friday.
So I've got a nickname. I've got a nickname for him.
D2.
Correct. Is that already out there? Is it?
No, I haven't heard. I just thought, R2D2. It's probably showing
we're
out
on the
Star
same
Wars.
page. I was pumping it up on Friday night with Rowan, with Roko on Footyology. But hey, I don't think we're inventing the wheel here, but surely he becomes R2D2.
He was lively, wasn't he?
Well, both of them add a different element to Collingwood, because Collingwood are a very measured team who tend to move the ball by foot and player to player, especially Bosenovalagi. He seems to get the ball and he's in perpetual motion. Doesn't look as though he's the type of player that wants to go back behind the mark, always looking to keep the ball moving. And I think their forward line needs that, because, you got the static Cox, and I don't want to be too hard on Mason Cox. He's in the team because there's no one more suitable to play that role. But, Myercheck had a really good game with 4 goals. I think they need a little bit more of as Dwayne Russell would say, chaos ball into that forward line. And I think K'Nor and Isaac could provide that.
Yeah, they've got leg speed.
Isaac and R2 could provide
that. They've got leg speed. They looked exciting. They looked composed with ball in hand as well. And young Will Kelly was exciting too in his short stint. He kicked a nice goal and unfortunately did his elbow, so he's done. But the thing that probably threw the Hawks out a little bit, knowing them the way I do, they would have done a lot of homework and preparation on Jamie Elliott and Stevenson playing in the forward line.
Yep.
And Nathan Buckley played them really high. And I think Jamie Elliott had 5 or 6 clearances for the game, which he obviously doesn't usually do. And Jaden Stevenson played nice and high. So that was a really big plus for the Pies. They didn't hit the scoreboard, but, geez, they were dangerous up the field. And it allowed some other guys, Will Hoskin-Elliott, to get deep. And I think, Brody Mychek was leading the Coleman medal as of this morning. I don't know. I think Charlie Dixon kicked one, so he might be equal now. But he's been – I've watched him play in the VFL for Port Melbourne for a long period of time and been a massive advocate of getting these mature age recruits. Just because you're 25 or 24 years of age doesn't mean that your time is up as an AFL footballer. In fact, I would much prefer to get an experienced big body guy than take a guess on an 18-year-old kid and have to develop him for 2 or 3 years, So since he's got into that Collingwood forward line, he's been sensational and contributed in the grand final that they lost a couple of years ago and has really become, arguably their number one key forward at the moment, Brody Mychek.
Let's move on to, hard to watch for St Kilda supporters. Saints led 7-2 in the first quarter. They just looked like they were going to absolutely obliterate Fremantle. Fremantle were in front by three-quarter time. That same end that St Kilda kicked 7 goals to in the first quarter, they couldn't score. Scored 0-0 in the third quarter.
It was. I flicked that game on halfway through the second quarter. And I went, oh, geez, Saints are continuing on their merry way, and they were dominant. And all of a sudden, just didn't things turn around? They rolled the dice with Nat Fyfe, and I thought that worked well. He spent the majority of the day up forward, but hit the scoreboard with a couple of goals. And I don't think the Saints stopped their work rate. What did you put it down to, Finey? Because you would have watched that game closer than I did. They kept trying, but
they drew level. There was that Walters gave away a 50-metre penalty and scores level, but Fremantle, and I think deserved the win. They were down to 20 men. What do you put it down to? I put it down to a few of the Saints players, and this is twice now, enjoying the game on their own terms and plenty of fun going one way, but not so much fun going the other way. And I think Brett Ratton's indicated that he might, at selection on Thursday, tell the world exactly who he thinks is good in a crisis and who isn't good in a crisis, because there are a few players, it seems, that when the heat is on. The problem now for St Kilda is, and this happens to teams, doesn't it, Campbell, when a team gets run down a couple of times, what happens? If they're 4 or 5 goals up, even in the third quarter, the opposition, they'll kick 1 goal and then the chattels start. We can get this mob stops, this mob's weak, and you get a bit of a target on your back, and teams certainly, feel that they're going to feel that they're always alive against St Kilda, and they're going to have to carry that burden for the rest of the season at least.
It's a good point, because it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Not only do the opposition feel like they're never out of the game, but also on the flip side of that, if you're a player for St Kilda, you've given up a couple of big leads and lost close ones, all of a sudden you start going into self-preservation mode a little bit. You tighten up, and you just don't play with that same sort of free-flowing ball movement that you had that put you in that winning position. But I saw that on last night with Melbourne. I reckon when the game tightened up a little bit, Finey, with 8 minutes to go in that last quarter and the Suns were coming,
Yep.
He actually, sounds a bit funny, but he actually saw a bit of fear in the Melbourne players' eyes that I don't want this footy. And Clayton Oliver and a few guys just handballed it off and said, mate, I'm done now. It's my responsibility done. And they were making skill errors and everything. Then they settled and won the game, which was great. But it's a funny psychology. And the guy that I reckon you could visually see wanting to get the ball in his hands in a tight game was Sonny Walters, because time and time again,
he loves it,
big
doesn't
moments he does. He kicks winning goals after the siren. He was the guy that won a clearance, got the ball out a few times, and he just wanted the footy. So it's an interesting point. But there was a few Saints players that started well and faded out. But I think collectively, it wasn't. They got happy with themselves. They started playing Hollywood football. It wasn't that. And they ran the game out. It just, you're probably right. They couldn't just, when things weren't played on their terms, they couldn't quite stop it and wrestle the momentum back the other way.
Yeah, and they are a team that, even though they've modified this, because over the last few years they are the team that play on the most, they still are a high-action, moving team. Yeah. And they're just going to have to learn the pace of the game and how to take the heat out of the game. But I think the problem with St Kilda is when they take the heat out of the game, they take the heat out of their own play. There's actually a way to slow the game down but still score. It doesn't slowing the game down by picking available players further afield, just changing the pace of the game, doesn't mean you're putting the cue in the rack. And for St Kilda, they're going to have to learn to change the pace and score as well, because you saw it in that third quarter. Well, between quarter time and the last quarter, they only kicked one goal. So they've got to learn how to play a different pace and score. Let's talk quickly about West Coast versus Adelaide. Adelaide doesn't have a forward line. That's their problem. They tried their guts out, actually, but they're no good up forward. So I think you'll find, I haven't even checked, I reckon that 50, inside 50s and all the other measurables, they'll be pretty close. They won't. They're not going to have trouble too many teams on the scoreboard with that forward line.
No, you're right. They had, it was 24 inside 50s to 49, so West Coast winning double. But I tell you what, if it wasn't for Riley O'Brien and the Nick Nat Nui sort of build up, the AFL should be thanking Riley and his Twitter work, because it would have been a non-event otherwise. And I tuned in just to see the response. Nick Nat Nui was brilliant, but I don't think he pulled O'Brien's pants down. In fact, all the things that Riley O'Brien said that he wanted to do on Nick Nat Nui was run around the ground and take marks, and he took 9, and 4 of those were contested, so huge tick. And he wanted to continue to stay involved when the ball hit the ground. Well, he's laid 7 tackles, so tick.
Yep.
Hit-outs, he got smashed. Hit-outs to advantage, they got smashed in clearances. But I thought under a bit of pressure, because the footy world was sort of watching how he'd go, he acquitted himself really well, had 19 touches, and I thought he was one of Adelaide's better players on the day. So Nick Nat Nui giving him a phone after the game, I reckon will be one of the great highlights of this year and maybe all time.
Very funny. So the other good thing for football out of this game was that with West Coast Eagles heading back home, they do so with Tim Kelly just about best on ground. So it's been a bit of a lukewarm start for the key signing over the summer, over the trade period for any team. When you think the West Coast are a bloody good side, add Tim Kelly, and, well, they'll be very pleased that he was pretty close to best on ground, so they'll be wrapped. Yeah,
he was. I thought McGovern was outstanding down back as well, but you're right. you could, I'm sure the umpires will be raffling the 3 votes to either one of those guys. So, yeah, look, it's probably been a motivational thing for the Eagles. They're so used to playing in front of a massive home ground in their own state. A lot of the guys have won a premiership. And I reckon that's probably why Richmond and the West Coast have been so poor at the start of this year, because no matter what they say, it's hard to keep that fire and that anger burning like it does for sides that are chasing you. You know what I mean? They're striving to play finals and win a premiership. Those other sides have done it. Now, that's not an excuse. I'm just giving you maybe a reason why they've started the season so poorly. And Richmond and West Coast, I reckon, have been sides that get better with continuity the more they play, and by the end of the year, they're their side to catch. So playing round one, break, not knowing, having to train by yourself, you don't probably push yourself as hard as some of these young guys that are chasing you, you know what I mean? And you come back, all of a sudden you've got to fly to Queensland to play away games, and, that is the only thing I can sort of tap into and think of why Richmond and the West Coast Eagles have been so poor to start this year. But they've had a bit of a kick up the arse, and now I think they're back on track.
We've mentioned Melbourne. Might move on to Essendon, North Melbourne, because just quietly, without setting the world on fire, with a game in hand, they're in the top 4.
Surprised me. Yeah, they really have surprised me. I thought North, with their competitive self, they always compete and try hard. They just lack probably a little bit of depth to win those games.
With Brown not kicking any goals and no Larkey, it's just hard to. I know that the big spearhead doesn't kick a lot of goals, but even 2 or 3 and creates and attracts a crowd. But unfortunately, Brown's really struggling, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. He's battling a little bit. His confidence looks shot, but Zurha, was outstanding. He just hits ball or body. But, Essendon have probably been the surprise packet a little bit for me. I thought they might struggle this year without Joe Danaher, and then obviously with Jakey Stringer going down last week, I thought, they might battle to kick a score, week in, week out. But Langford's been pretty solid. I like Laverty. He should have kicked. He'd be filthy on himself. He should have kicked 2 or 3 last night, and he missed some sitters. Tip and Woody was dangerous as ever. Their defenders are rock solid. Hurley's a good player. They've got a good balance of one-on-one defenders, and run and carry guys. McKenna and Sard were really good with their ball movement. And their midfield, Shield might get a week for that bump, but they've got a pretty good midfield. Darcy Parish and McGrath have really come on now in their 3rd or 4th year and look like they're going to go on and be solid midfielders. So Snelling's been a good one as well. I reckon across the board they're pretty good, and the emergence of Jordan Ridley down back just takes a bit of pressure off some of their big guys.
Yep. Well, you're a betting man, aren't you, Campbell? Of course you are.
I certainly am.
Well, what prize Zaharakis 3 goals? Given that he had 2 kicks the week before.
Yeah, he's been out of form, but he's a star. He's a best and fairest winner there. He's played a couple of 100 games. I reckon I probably wouldn't have backed him to kick 3, but he does tend to bob up and kick a goal here or there when the club need him. And that goal from the pocket was it could be goal of the year.
Well, prior to the game, he was averaging 0.4 goals a game, so he's kicked 3 goals too. He was averaging 10.3 possessions a game. He got 20 touches. Right across the board, a much better performance by Zaha. He's got his knockers. So
he does.
A good effort.
Yeah. It was a huge performance.
Good on, and good effort by him. Now today, Port Adelaide have beaten GWS. That's a pretty important result in the context of the season, isn't it? And they will head back to Adelaide shortly with a swag full of points on top of the AFL ladder.
Yeah, absolutely. Kenny Hinkley's done a great job with that group, and I just feel like they really embraced the hub life, and their footy it showed. They took every challenge thrown up to them. Coming off the loss last week against Brisbane, we were thinking maybe did we overrate them? The thing that I enjoyed the most today was Charlie Dixon's been in great form, and when he kicks 4 goals or more, they've never lost.
Yep.
So when he's firing, they're great.
Yep.
They did, and he was pretty well beaten today, I thought. He kicked 1, but they managed to find a way and conjure up some other avenues to goal and spread the load a little bit. I think Sam Powell-Pepper is back to his best from his first year.
That was his best game of the season. He's been very physical, but hasn't had a lot of the ball. He was able to combine that big, imposing frame. You got him and Ollie Wines sort of patrolling the on-ball situation together. You'll have a few guys not looking over their shoulder, but, maybe hurrying their kicks. They're big boys. And
yes.
I thought he was almost best. And who's been all right? Cole Amon.
He's been good, hasn't he? Yeah, and I reckon a guy who hasn't played a lot of footy and certainly has had no continuity over the last 3 years, but he's an interesting and versatile player for him is Trent McKenzie, because he can play tall and he can play small, and he uses it so well. He spent some time on Jeremy Cameron today, and you'd think that's a mismatch, but he held his own, and then he can go on and play on a Toby Green, you know what I mean? So he's just slotted into that sort of, when I played with him, he was a winger on the Gold Coast. He's become a sort of halfback flanker, reads it well, third man up. And I think there's no surprise. He's had a lot of hammy and quad and soft tissue injuries. I'm guessing, but I reckon he's played 5 games in 3 years, Finey, right? He's finally played 4 or 5 in a row now, and with that continuity, obviously comes better performance, but I think he's an important player for that Port defence.
It's taken 3 years for him to be the forgotten man of football, where he's barely played football, for the football world to forget and every commentator to forget that in the first few years of his career, all they would say was, what a magnificent kick Trent McKenzie is. And it almost became a cross that he couldn't bear, because everybody decided, oh, you're a great kick, Trent. You just don't get the ball. And, he started being sort of marginalised as, when are you going to America to try your hand at punting? It was almost as though you were a one-trick pony for an average football club. But you're right, he's actually got offered much more.
Yep.
He was sort of picked up by Port Adelaide. Remember, they picked up him and Trengo from Melbourne, and they gave both boys every opportunity. Now, Trengo didn't make the grade. They also picked up Tumpus from Melbourne. They gave guys.
Is he still on the list, Finey?
No, surely not. No, I don't believe so. I mean, you know what happened with Tumpus?
Nah.
Because he was, where did he go? That was a player that Melbourne picked ahead of Ollie Wines because they didn't want Jack Viney to be with his best mate. It was the most ridiculous draft reason I've ever heard. Well, they were mates together. We might split them up or take Tumpus. But, I grew up in McKinnon, mate, and I don't know if you know that part of Melbourne, near Bentley. I had a lot of mates growing up who were Greek. A lot of them were driving in Form 3. So I'm not 100% sure Tompus wasn't 24. I'm not sure he wasn't 24 when he was playing TAC Cup. He was a big boy. But, so they gave these highly rated guys a go, and a really good go. And I'm really pleased for Trent McKenzie that he's been able to recast himself as a hard-working footballer. Don't worry about how he kicks. He works hard.
He does, but he's had to learn that because he was lazy early days. But I reckon if you are to have a long, not necessarily successful, but a long AFL career, you need to reinvent yourself, at least twice. Like Travis Boak was an on-baller and he was just about done. And then remember 2 years ago he went to the half-forward flank, resurrected his career, and now, he's back in the midfield and that. But, I was a defender at Hawthorn and went to the Gold Coast and was just about done and had to reinvent myself as a small forward. And,
you were almost a small full forward though.
Yeah, but you just have to, because sides work you out and they work out what your weaknesses are and things like that. And if you just think you can play the same way you always do, there's exceptions, obviously. Like Scotty Pendlebury's always been a midfielder and is a great midfielder. But for mere mortals, that want to have a 8, 9, 10, 12-year career, you see a lot of guys, that might start as a half forward that become defenders. Brent Guerra. You need to have more strings to your bow, especially in the modern game. Otherwise, you'll get spat out. Yeah.
Yeah, you certainly, Campbell, had definitely different lives up forward and up back, and even within those roles, played different roles. But you never spent too much time in the midfield. I guess you were never marathon man. You probably, you got to know your limitations. It's not from lack of training. When you were playing league football, I've got no doubt you wouldn't have played league football or as much as you did or as successfully as you did if you were a slacker at training. But some people just aerobically are not capable of running the modern midfield.
Short twitch fibres, Finey, and I think I've got the shortest. I was 20 metres, mate. Anything over 20, I was cast.
Yeah. I don't know how much breeding has to do with it, but the sire certainly didn't race over anything further than 1,200, did he?
No, definitely not. He tells a story about the year that he came over to Richmond and they had to run the tan. Yep. And Tommy Hafey and everyone was there and Wale Roberts, and he cut through the middle. They knew he was cheating because he cut through the middle and he came out in a pack that they knew that he shouldn't be in.
Well, I actually live 4 doors down from the. I actually heard you the other day on radio on SEN. I think you were doing a wrap for the footy, and you were walking around
Warrandyte.
And I think you were walking around the town.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was. Yeah, that was the week before. I was walking the town with some lads.
And I was just driving home, and I thought I should because I'm only where I live is very close to the town. I was going to track you down, but I thought the bloke's huffing and puffing enough.
Yeah, that's right.
Just the last one on that. They talk about explosive footballers. That really powerful explosive burst over 10, 15 metres. Your dad was explosive standing still. He didn't need to move.
No, that's right. That's right.
There was a powder keg ready to go off. One more game. Well, I'll do a quote. It's not a direct quote. It's, this football's shit. They don't kick any goals. I can't watch it. It's unbearable. I can't wait till the blokes play. I don't know why anybody watches AFLW. And that's, final scores. Brisbane 5-5 defeated North Melbourne 4-4. I wonder what they made of today's game up at the Gabba.
Oh, it was a putrid game, wasn't it? But it did rain heavily.
I know it was raining, but still, 4 goals to 3.
Yeah, it was very defensive. I think it would have been a really tough day to be a forward. Poor old Tommy Lynch played today with a broken hand, and
Yeah.
the one condition you don't want when you've got a glove on and you've just had surgery is the conditions he got. But I don't think Richmond would care how many they kicked. It was just a matter of winning. It's 1 week less that they'll be without, Edwards, Hooley, Cochin. They'll just be counting down the days that they can get some of those guys back. Obviously, Nankervis and Prestia are longer term. Whether they'll come back this year, who knows? But it'll just be about banking a couple of wins, while they're up there, and do it ugly, and move on. If I was Dimmer, I wouldn't even review the game. They know what they need to do, and they can do it. They can do it. So, yeah, was not one for the highlights reel, Finey.
No, there was something about the game though. On Thursday night, I had a look at the ins, and because it was a Sunday game, they still had to take, shave 3 players from the squad. But in the history of watching league football, I have never seen 12 names to come into a side. Now, it was 9 players, but 3 of them had hyphens.
Yeah, Igmalesi Smith. Who else? There was Coleman Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other one.
It made it look long, didn't it? The interchange.
Yeah, I thought that's a lot of names. Not as many people, but a lot of names.
Yeah.
I guess one last one just to leave, probably the big discussion point, was that bump by Ben Long on Sean Darcy. Now, that's got different ways of interpreting it. I don't think any of them have been very good for Ben. But
I'll interpret it for you, Finey.
Well, have we got the verdict on that yet?
Not yet.
That's tonight, isn't it?
Yeah, it'll probably come out or maybe tomorrow. Who knows? But I'll say this, and I'm not condoning it, but I'm not going to hang him out to dry either, because I was always taught, if I'm going into a pack, to turn into the pack to protect myself, and because your hip and your backside is a good way to shield the ball and everything. Now, the ball was right there. Did he run past the ball to put the bump on? I don't think he did. He ran in to make contact, to then maybe go after the ball. Now, he's hit him with his in the head with his hip, so he's in trouble. But that to me used to be a natural footy action. I don't know if the game's changed now. He was only a few metres at the back of that stoppage, so it's not like he's come flying in on a long run up and said, I'm going to bump this bloke with his head's over the footy. There's a bit of hysteria around at the moment for every time there's a head knock, and I get it. It's sacrosanct, and we've got to be careful with concussions and everything, and he'll get a couple of weeks, but he doesn't deserve any more than that. And if more players went in and protected themselves with their hip and their arse, there'd be a lot less concussions than we see at the moment, because they're sitting ducks and they deliberately duck their head down to get a free kick, and they risk concussion because of it.
There were 2 angles on that. The first replay I saw, I thought, instinct, just basic instinct. That's good play. That's exactly how you go in for the ball. Ball's there. Shield your as you put your head down to get the ball, shield and protect yourself from the players behind you. You can see what's ahead of you, that's safe, and what's behind you is protected, as you say, by your rump and your backside. Just how we were all taught to play footy. And then I think to myself, and Big Sean Darcy, what are you doing going down their head first? That's a dangerous way to go for the footy. I then looked at it from the other angle, the last angle. I thought that looks really bad for Ben Long. That looks like a drive-by almost, that he's just gone through it, because he was there already, Sean Darcy. He was established. He was going down to pick up the ball. And my opinion on Darcy was wrong. That angle definitely showed that as Long would have eventually had to bend down to pick up the ball, that's what Darcy was doing. And it looked like a bit of a, coming in and coming through that bit of play with your hip. So Yeah, the description will be interesting by the MRO.
Yeah, I reckon he's probably looking at 2 or 3 weeks, and
Yep.
yeah, there's definitely more of a duty of care around guys with their head down.
Yep.
I just, you naturally you see it, and then you start reading comments from journalists and fans and things like that, and they smashed him. And
Yep.
it's not an offence that he deserves to be, called a dirty player or any of those names. Yeah, he got it wrong. He come in with too much force while the guy's head was over the footy, and he'll cop that with his suspension. But it wasn't a non-football action, if you ask me. We've seen it.
That's right.
I mean, you can punch someone in the guts and get 1 week. That's a non-football action.
Yep.
At least the ball was there. He's come in too hard with his, with his hips. So I don't believe in hanging blokes out to dry like some people in the media do for a split-second decision there where, you got to make a decision. Do I stand back, wait till he picks it up and tackle, which is what a lot of the guys do these days, or do I try and make the play myself?
Yeah, and it's interesting because, in the last 2 weeks the game's changed a lot. There's some crazy free kicks being given for holding the ball. So, just another example of how dangerous it is to, what was the old expression, see ball, get ball? I think it's now see ball. Think about what the current interpretation is.
Wait for someone to
wait for somebody else to get ball.
And then tackle them and get a free kick.
Yeah, the old see ball, get ball's gone out the window, mate.
A little bit. Yeah, it has a little bit. So these players are smart. They train it. They need to adjust. But there's already been a sort of easing on the rule from last week to this week in terms of holding the ball, hasn't there? So it's frustrating for fans and more frustrating for players. But it was still a pretty good round of footy, I thought.
Yep, there were plenty of highs, plenty of lows, and you get that in every round of footy. Hey, great catching up, Campbell.
You too, Finey. Have a great week, and I might see you back here next Sunday.
Yeah, well, you won't see me out and about. That's a $1,600 fine. So that's the only place you'll see us. See you, mate.
Good on you, mate. See you later.